Hey Daniela, how are you?
Oh, hi. So
Did I scare you?
a little bit. I was looking at a database and I was so focused, but I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for joining today. I was super excited to have you on. For listeners, real quick, I learned about Daniela because you were written up in the UNC Chapel Hill Keenan Flagler. It's a very long word, isn't it, for the business school
It is.
newsletter, and it was talking about this new professor who had come and was also a professional chess player and was now studying disclosures. Not, I know you do more research, which we'll talk about. And I thought this was very interesting. And I never talked to a professional chess player. So I wrote Daniela, and Daniela was kind enough to write back and said, "Yeah, I'd love to be on the show. So thanks for joining."
No, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited and I look forward to having some interesting discussions today.
So, how does one become a professional chess player? Like, as a kid, were you just thinking to yourself, "Oh, I want to be a professional chess player"? I didn't go to school with any kids who said that.
Well, not quite. You don't really know even that you can become a professional chess player, right? As a kid, you just start playing, you enjoy the game, the competitions, traveling to different cities, meeting new people, and suddenly you're so into it. And whenever you think of it, you already call yourself a professional chess player because you play all the tournaments in your city, in your country. You go to international competitions, you study chess. So that's the definition of a professional chess player, right? Not just someone who plays as a hobby, but once you're really into it, it's part of your lifestyle.
How did you get started playing chess? And for listeners, can you uh, go back a little bit and tell everybody where you're from and how that started?
Yes, of course. I am originally from Mexico. I moved here when I was 18 years old because I earned a chess scholarship to study in my bachelor's degree. So I went to college with a full chess scholarship, and I'll tell you all about it. But I've been living here in the US since I was 18. I'm now 30, and I am a professor, an assistant professor of accounting at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But my story began when I was about 10 years old and I was in my elementary school. And one teacher came to my classroom and asked the kids who wanted to play in a chess tournament. And I didn't really know how to play, but I knew that my dad had been a player when he was young. And I thought that maybe he could teach me some moves, maybe I would get out of class and have some fun. So I enrolled in that tournament. And that afternoon, my dad taught me the basic moves, some strategies, and I ended up winning the tournament at my school. I was 10 years old. I guess none of the other kids knew how to play either, right? But then I qualified to another tournament against other schools, and my dad kept teaching me a few more strategies, a few more moves, and I kept winning and qualifying to bigger tournaments. I eventually reached the statewide tournament. So in Mexico, I'm from a city called Durango, and we played I played against all of the kids in my same state, and I qualified to the nationals. So at that point, my dad, he didn't know what else to do with me. It was going so fast that I started looking for other help, getting some more coaches, maybe studying a bit more on my own as well. And I qualified and ended up winning that national tournament in Mexico. And I qualified to go to the World Chess Championship in Greece at the end of the year. So I was 10 years old with less than a year of having learned how to play chess and already going to the World Chess Championship in Greece. So that was extremely excited to me. It became some sort of a motivation for me to continue winning the national championship. And every year I would go to a different country, to a Pan American tournament, a World Chess Championship, to play and just continue improving.
Were you nervous going to Greece at 10 years old
No,
playing
because
chess?
No, I went with my dad, so he went there to take care of me. We went with the whole Mexican team. and a lot of parents. So for me, it was the opposite of being nervous. I was excited to get out there and go to a new country, and just meet a lot of different people. I guess once you are on the chessboard, you do get a little bit of nervous. It's part of the game. A game of chess has a lot of emotions, and that is one of the things that chess teaches you, how to control your emotions. So definitely you do get a bit nervous, but the whole experience of going to Greece for me was beyond exciting.
So did this just come natural to you? Like, did you just your dad taught you some moves and you were like, "Oh," and look, Danielle, I've never learned how to play chess. Crazy enough. I don't know why. I guess I have no idea why. Somebody asked me that the other day. They're like, "Oh, you don't know how to play chess?" I was like, "No." But um did it just like was it make sense in your brain that you could see the moves? Because from everything I've read and everything
Mm.
that I've studied, or I've read some other books, which I mentioned to you in a video I sent you, but the it feels like there's there's obviously strategy to it, but there's, I guess, the way that people describe it is they can see it in their head because you really need to understand moves ahead or the
Mhm.
implications of that move you make, right? Is that a good way to would you describe it differently?
Right. So chess is a combination of multiple things. So you're right. It does involve strategy. It's big on strategy, but it has so many other aspects of it. Uh, I always say that chess is the perfect combination of imagination and logic, because you have to be very creative, right? Whenever you have to formulate a plan and have harmony amongst all of your pieces, that all of them need to work together so that they can, beat the enemy and finally checkmate your opponent's king. They all have to work together, and it requires some imagination in terms of how to put all the pieces in the right pieces so that they are working together. But it's also a very logical game. There are some rules, and there are um, some strategies that you can follow, and it's all linked together based on logic, right? If I move my piece on this square, right, on this, what is the best possible move that my opponent can make, right? Maybe there are a variety of moves. So you have to examine each of them. And then to each of them, you have to think, okay, in that case, what would be my best move? So it forms sort of a tree, right? And that tree, that's maybe what you mean when people are looking at it in their head, because obviously you cannot physically move the pieces and see what would happen. You have to imagine it. So it is it requires a lot of imagination, concentration, strategy, right? And there are certain ways to study chess. You can actually practice these skills, and you can learn what are the best ways of putting the pieces, so that maybe it fits with your style of playing. Maybe you're an aggressive player who wants to attack, or maybe you're more of a defensive player who wants to strategically hold the position and then attack at the end, right? So there are many different aspects of chess that, depending on what you want to focus in, uh, you study them differently.
Did you plan out your first 5 moves like a team, like a football team or even a soccer team, or any team, they plan out what 5 pitches they're gonna put out, and that gets you started?
Definitely, yes. So you're talking about the opening. So a game of chess has 3 stages. We have the opening, the middle game, and then the ending. And in the opening, that is when you decide the first moves, right? You want to set the pieces in a specific way, depending on what your opponent answers. But then, and you can think of it of the pawns. I'm not sure how familiar you are with all the pieces, but
I
the
don't know any of the
pawn,
any of the pieces, so just
any of the
assume me and the listeners don't know anything.
Okay.
Okay.
So basically, you choose some of the pieces to go in a certain squares, and that sort of forms like a formation or a structure, and that determines where on the chessboard you're going to play. So there are books and a lot of theory, people who have played many games, who have analyzed these openings, these first moves, and have come up with some recommendations. So you pick some opening or some way of starting the game, and then that opens the door for many different possibilities that fit your style of game, the type of game that you want to play, right? More active or more closed and defensive. But those are all decisions that you have to make at the start, and you have to stand by them and study them and update them as you play.
Are you an aggressive player or a defensive player?
Oh, I had some different seasons throughout my life, but I think I've always been more of a strategic player, I would say. Not necessarily defensive, because I always try to attack whenever I do have the chance, but I'm not that aggressive. I don't throw the pieces at my opponent. Some people do that, and it's scary, because they make sacrifices, they put traps here and there. I tend to play more on the strategic game, be more patient, try to win positionally, and once I develop some advantage over time, then I can really show it, right? But I tend to be more patient. It's just a different style. It almost matches the personality of a person in a way. It's interesting.
So you really could pick a partner by playing chess against them and seeing what personality they have, couldn't you?
In a way, actually, I ended up marrying a chess player.
What?
Um, yes, my husband, he's also from another country. He's from El Salvador. We met in a chess tournament. And sometimes when we speak and we were talking about a person, we like to imagine what opening that person would play if they were a chess player, because we know that person, we sort of know their personality, and it can be reflected on a chess game. It's very, very interesting.
Who wins?
Whenever we play,
Yeah.
oh boy, it's hard. I think he's a little bit better than me, especially because he continues to play online, on online, on rapid games. We call them blitz, and I don't play anymore. But he's not that far away from me. If he doesn't pay attention, I can win a couple of pieces and beat him. But to be honest, none of us study well anymore. We don't play professionally anymore. So I think we're not as good as we used to be. But we have fun.
So how do you practice? Like, how do you just try to go against, you almost have to go against the opponents you see in the tournaments, or do you and your dad would practice, or you just practice against a random person in the park so that you have no idea what's happening? Like, how do you practice chess?
That's a good question. There are different ways. The easiest one is to play online. Nowadays, there are many websites where you can open a free account and just play chess against anybody in the world. Right? You can play a rapid game, 5 minutes for each player, for instance, or a slower game. Um, but usually, people, once they're really playing professionally, the way they practice is they go to tournaments as often as they can. And in tournaments, you are going to play against people mostly in your same level. There are categories, right? You register according to your level. And then you try to beat them, right? And that's how you practice, because you've been studying some openings, some moves, and you want to see if they work, and how do your opponents react, so you can test your strategies against your opponents. But then you may sometimes just learn something new, right? You cannot predict a full game of chess, so definitely you are going to put in practice many different skills, and learn something new. But enrolling in tournaments is another way. And lastly, as you mentioned, you can play against your friends. If you have anyone to study chess with, you can always play a chess game and practice whatever you were studying.
Were people upset that you were 10 years old and then 11 and even 12? I mean, you were professional chess for 12 years?
Yes, for
Yeah.
12 years.
So you were younger. You were very clearly younger than some of the other people in that tournament. And I found I have a nephew who's a professional shooter, and I think he's been winning championships and beating older adults for a long time, and that generally doesn't go over well. So, how was the reception of this little lady walking into this chess tournament who's 10 years old and basically kicking all these people's butts?
Uh, well, it was funny because there were some people who definitely did not want to play against me. Um, but I think it was exciting for everyone, at least to see that chess was growing in Mexico. In Mexico, chess really isn't that popular. So having kids that are generally interested and that are becoming good, I think it's positive thing that people like to see. They see it as cute and funny, right? But maybe the other kids did not see it as cute and funny, because I would play the national tournaments and the Olympiad tournaments. You play against other kids in your same age, right? So I was playing under 10 years old, under 12, 14, 16, 18. So that's when the competition feels really fierce, right? You want to be the best one. And the problem is that once you start winning the tournaments, then you are the opponent that everyone wants to beat. Everyone prepares against you. They study your games. You are the one who has been leading all these years, and everyone is sort of against you, in competition against you. So that's very intense. But at the end of the day, it's a game. Everyone is there to have fun. You make a lot of friends in this tournament. So I think it's overall a very positive experience.
Well, I think so, but the tournaments I've seen and the things I've read, it's like at that top level, at that even national or world level, the competition's fierce. I mean, it's a
Yes.
country reputation, it's a personal reputation. I mean, I've never been like friendly competition, sure, but I mean, you're there because you want to win, not right. So, um, everything I've seen, and I guess I've probably seen more of the or read about. I
Mm.
think we had a famous person here in the United States, or famous Russians. Russians, I guess, are known for being very good at chess, and it seemed like a very cutthroat, cold sort of situation. But it sounds like you had more fun.
But also because I was a kid most of the time that I was a professional chess player, and not all of the time. I went to college and I was still playing chess, right? Because I was under a chess scholarship, so I had to compete against other universities. And I do see your point that at the end of the day, it is a competition, right? And everyone wants to win. Um, but the type of competitions that I went to were not like the countries against countries, that there's a lot of sometimes politics involved. And right, and I did go to one chess Olympiad where I played representing my own country, Mexico, against other countries, in the all adults could play that tournament. So it's sort of like the Olympic games that we organize for all sports, but chess has its own separate competition for that. In that one, you would feel more fierce competition against countries. Um, so yes, that aspect can definitely be involved. I didn't go through it as bad as other people. For me, it really was a lot of fun, and all the traveling and all the friends that I made. Um, but definitely there are some things that, for instance, one silly example. I have a friend, a very good friend. She was my roommate when I went to college, and we both were on a chess scholarship. Whenever we played chess, we hated each other, because we really hated each other. Even just the way she moved the pieces was so annoying to me, because I hated her on the board. I really wanted to beat her. She was stronger than me. I managed to beat her one time on the tournament that we played officially, but otherwise she would always beat me, and I hated her. But she was my friend outside of the chessboard. We were roommates. But it's sort of contradictory, but I guess I was able to separate the game from real life.
I think that's a good lesson. Well, I want to go back for a minute before we get to this chess scholarship that I didn't even know existed. But the you said there's a beginning, there's an opening, there's a middle game, and then there's an end game. are those stages determined by the number of pieces that are left in your, or is it time based? Meaning, how many pieces do you start with?
So you start with 16 pieces each.
16 pieces each. Is it when you get to 10, you're in the middle game, or is it by time based on the type of game you're playing? Because you can play these rapid games, it sounds like, and then you can play what would be a normal
Mhm.
time period that you would be allowed to make a move in a normal professional, air quotes,
Right.
tournament.
Okay. So um, it is mostly determined by the pieces, by where they are placed, and you're right, by how many pieces are left on the board, right? At the beginning, the opening, and then the middle game, you can have the same number of pieces, but they're placed differently. They're no longer on their original squares, right? They're out. We call them, they are developed because they're active, right? They're starting to work together. So that's when the game it's transformed from the opening to the middle game. But then the ending, it definitely does require fewer pieces to be on the board for it to be the end of the game, right? And don't think that a chess game can only finish when it's an end game. Of course, someone can get mated in the opening, right? Or if they make a really bad move, you can give them checkmate in the middle game at all stages. But generally, those are the stages, and it's determined by the number of pieces and where they are placed. Now, you mentioned something interesting about the timing. It turns out that whenever you play a game, imagine what the incentives are, right? If I'm in a losing position and I have to make a move, what if I never make a move? Then I would never lose the game, right? So there has to be some sort of time pressure for me to be forced to make a move. So every player has a clock. We have a clock that's together but has two areas. One is for the white pieces and the other is for the black pieces. So whenever you make a move, your clock, you push the clock and it stops. And the other person's clock starts running down. So they start running out of time. We usually have long games that are about 1 hour and a half per player, right? And every time you make a move, you get 30 seconds more on your clock. And that is super important because usually at the beginning of the game, once the position is more complicated in the middle game, you tend to think a lot. I've seen people think an hour on a move, and that's usually not a good idea because you run out of your time faster. But thinking about your move 10 minutes is not weird at all. It's very normal. 5 to 10 minutes about a very important move that can determine where the whole game is going to go. That's probably a smart decision to really think about everything. But as you said, every stage is different. Once you are in the end game, you have very little time. You cannot spend even 1 minute on one move. It's very risky because then you're only going to have a few seconds for the remaining moves. And if you run out of time, you lose the game. And then it's a lot of pressure, a lot of anxiety over these chess games, but it's part of the game.
So let me understand this. You start, this is in a professional setting. You each get an hour and a half total. You can use that time however you want.
Yes.
And then when you do make your move, you get a bonus of 30 seconds back.
Yes. Yes. 30 seconds increment to your clock.
So if you do 10 minutes, if you wait 10 minutes, you get 30 seconds back. So but if you only take 30 seconds, you get 30 seconds back. So you stay at an hour and a half. Is that math
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And what are you doing? Like, do you go get coffee or something? It's like, it'd be so annoying to me. I'd be like, "Hey, make the move," right? Like, I mean, I mean, you're just sitting there watching them watch the thing. I mean, maybe I would just stare at them to create pressure because there's all those
Hmm?
games going on too, isn't there?
Yes, definitely. Next to you, there are other tables, well, other people making playing their games. Uh, it's a little bit of both. Sometimes, so if it's your turn and your clock is running, you cannot stand up. Right, you have to sit and make your move before you stand up. I guess it's a rule that they implemented to avoid people to prevent people from cheating, right? Because, oh, it's my turn, I don't know what
Ah,
to do, I'm going get up and see if I can get an answer from someone who's watching my game or on my phone. I mean, they try to implement all of these rules, and no phones, and no, you cannot talk to anyone. But generally speaking, if you are the one who is waiting on your opponent to make a move, usually you are so into your game that you use that time to continue thinking and make sure that your strategy is correct and you didn't miss anything. I know it may seem boring, but it's so exciting once you are into the game. There's so many options. The possibilities of all the moves that could happen are endless. Chess is a very complex game. But if you get bored or tired, absolutely you can get up, go to the restroom, get a coffee, maybe go see your friends' games or the positions that seem interesting, definitely. But you're always watching for your game too. As soon as your opponent makes their move, then you come back and see what happened, and did it fall in my trap or not. So it's back and forth, but you can definitely take a break whenever you need to. And this is one of the long games. There are blitz games where there's only 5 minutes per person. So you definitely do not stand up in that very short game. It's a very few time to make it, to think of the whole game. So you want to use it as efficiently as you can.
But when you do get up, you can't talk to anybody. Is it the honor system?
Yes, the honor system. I mean, you can, but you cannot, like secretly speak and then be looking at a game and, oh yes, because people may get the wrong idea that maybe they are helping you in your game. And right, the honor system is that we're not supposed to discuss games that are in progress, right? You're not supposed to talk about your game to someone else, because someone else could give you a hint, oh, maybe you should play this other move, and that's cheating. You cannot get any help from anyone. So that's generally the honor system. Yes.
Can you talk to the other player? Like say things like they do in poker, like, "Hey Daniela, like I'm getting hungry. What do you do?" I mean, because all that's a mental game, right? I mean,
It
it puts
is.
pressure on someone. I'd be like, Jesus, man, what's going on here? Like, can't you make that move? Can't you see that? Right?
That you cannot talk to your opponent unless you are offering him a draw, or to tie the game. Then you make your move, and then you ask the other person, do you want a draw? Do you want to tie the game? And then the other person, on their own time, they have time to think whether they want to accept or continue playing, reject your offer.
Why would you do that?
You can do that if, um, well, many different reasons. One is that you are playing the game and you generally believe that the game is tied, that it's very hard. No matter what you do, the other person, if they make their best move, you're not going to be able to beat them. Let's say that the basic example is if each player has the king and only the king. Right, that is a drawish position because the kings themselves cannot checkmate each other. Right, it's the only piece. You need more pieces to give checkmate to the other king. So no matter what moves each person makes, it's going to be a draw. Right, but of course it becomes more abstract. If there are some pieces on the board, but you believe that it's useless to keep trying, and if you keep trying, you run at the risk of maybe making a mistake and losing the game. The other person has that risk as well, right? So I wouldn't say it's a coward decision, but it is a preventing taking that risk and just offering a draw. And sometimes it's because of the tournament. If you make a draw, maybe you win the championship, right? And the other person maybe is losing the game and has an incentive to accept your draw. Sometimes that happens. And if you continue to play, even though you were a little bit better, maybe you would win the game, right? Because you were a bit better. But what if you make a mistake and you lose? It happens all the time. So that's why sometimes offering a draw is overall a good decision once you're fighting for the championship, and that is enough to get the first place. So lots of reasons.
Seems very parallel or analogous to life, because basically what you just described is sort of greed, right? You see this in a lot of people. I use drug dealers because there's a lot of movies. I'm not suggesting anybody should be a drug dealer, but you see these movies where these drug dealers or these people doing illegal activity make all this money and they can basically get away with it, but they keep going. They don't need any more money, but they are driven by greed and power and status. You see that. I was talking about Tour de France is going on right now, and Lance Armstrong. Lance
Yes.
Armstrong wins all these tournaments, all these Tour de France's. He basically can retire, but I forget the story. This guy wins, and he gets angry about it, and the whole group, the whole I guess the person in charge and the bicycle association comes to him and says, "Hey, look, why don't you just like there's a lot of controversy, but it's all going to go away if you just stop, right? Like don't press it." But he decides that he can't do that. He can't let it go. He comes back, he wins, and then he loses everything. And you see this. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just using these examples where it's like, why can't the human psyche just leave it? And it's this game that everybody plays with themselves, and it sounds like that's exactly what goes on in chess. And someone might say, "Well, I'm not going to call a draw with Daniela. I'm going to win," when they're clearly losing. They have more to lose than they actually realize, but their ego can't take it, so they press on, and then ultimately it blows up everything. It's sort of crazy how that works. Don't you think?
No, absolutely. And in chess, a lot of that happens too. There's a lot of ego here, especially if you've been winning the tournament so far, right? You've been beating everyone. At the end, you sort of build this impression of yourself that you are the best, right? And you cannot lose this game because no one has been able to beat you. And at the end, this happens to a lot of people, and I think it has happened to me too. It's very easy to fall into this greedy trap that you just want to show everyone how good you are, but at the same time, you are risking everything, right? So it's definitely a battle of self-control. I think that's when you have to sit down and realize, wait a minute, I have been winning this tournament, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm absolutely the best. Maybe other people have been making mistakes. Maybe I could make a mistake too. I mean, sometimes people are so tied together in the same level that just because one person won one game, it doesn't mean that person is better, right? I mean, of course, people, these competitions are very fierce. Um, and if you think that you can just beat everyone because you've been having a good tournament, you are putting at risk everything, right? Maybe at the end, if you found, for instance, a perpetual check, that's a move that we have in chess, that if you give a check to your opponent's king and the opponent's king moves, and then you give another check in the same square, and then they come back, and you repeat this position 3 times, then it's a draw automatically, right? And you can force that in some positions, right? So if, let's say, you had an opportunity to automatically draw the game using this sequence of moves, but if your ego and your greed comes in the picture and says, no, I'd rather just win and kill this person on the board, then what if you blunder later, right? What if you make a mistake and you lose the tournament? Terrible things have happened to people in this way, but I guess you're right. It happens in all aspects of life, and it's just a matter of trying to control that ego and that greed.
Can you remember a time it happened to you?
I was remembering when I guess something similar happened, but in the opposite way. So I was winning a tournament. I was 15, and I was winning the under 20th championship in Mexico. And if you won, you would qualify to the World Chess Olympiad in Germany. And I didn't qualify, to give you a spoiler. But I was playing the last game. I had been winning all the games in the tournament. And in the last game, I was playing against a younger girl. She, I think, was 14 or 13. And she was very strong. But she had half a point less than me. So if I was ahead of her, if we drew the game, if we had a tie, then each of us gets half point, right? Half of a point, and I would still be on top of her, so I would get the first place. So I knew that only a draw would be needed for me to win the tournament. If I got a draw, then I would win the tournament. But psychologically, I was under so much pressure that the whole game I tried to play to make a draw instead of trying to play to win the game. Because winning for me seemed so risky. To win the game, you have to risk a little bit more, right? You have to make a little bit more aggressive moves to try to set some traps. And playing for a draw is more like protecting your pieces. I'm not going to get checkmated. So psychologically, mentally, I played incorrectly because I played more to draw the game. So I guess in this case, I was not trying to be greedy. I was more like on the I don't know how to call it, but
Too conservative.
Too conservative, exactly. I didn't want to lose. But because I was trying to force the game, she ended up finding a way to enter my castle, my structure, and she beat me. And it was so horrible for me. I got second place. I think I got a laptop, a computer. I don't even remember what the prize was. I did not qualify to the Olympiad. She did. I mean, she was a great player. She continued to do it great. But for me, that was a very a hard lesson to learn, that I cannot let fear interfere. I need to always play a game as if it was a separate game. I'm there, I can win this game. So let's just play to try to win. You cannot force the things to happen. So all I was thinking was the championship again, and I thought that if I try to play for a draw, she wouldn't beat me, But she did. So I'm telling you, these things happen, and you can only learn from these mistakes, right? You can just try to make it better for the next time and change the way you see these things.
I wonder statistically if playing defense loses more than actually trying to win. You see this in you see this in soccer. You see this in American football. American football drives me crazy, Danielle. I don't know if you watch it, but they'll be winning. There's 4 minutes left. They're up by a touchdown, and they go into this thing called prevent defense, where they're going to give the person the easy yards so that they don't give up the big yards. And all that happens is, in general, the team walks right down the field and now is in position to score and either tie or win, instead of just saying, we got here by playing to win. Let's just play the win. And those people, obviously, and you see it in soccer, in European soccer, in World Cup soccer, you see it in almost everything. People will say, oh, there's 6 minutes left or 5 minutes left. We're going to go and play defense instead of attacking, which got them there in the first place. And I haven't figured out, because obviously, especially in professional sports, there are people doing all the statistics. They know each move. They know the statistics on each move, just like chess and poker, except I think chess hasn't gotten to where poker is, where they show the little percentages, right? Or maybe they do on TV. I haven't seen a chess tournament on TV, but it's like I can't understand for the life of me why the humans do that, because it doesn't appear to me. It appears to me that you put yourself more in jeopardy by playing defense than you do in playing offense. What do you think?
Yes. No, I agree with you. I also wonder how that works, right? Because I've seen that too in soccer games. So in Mexico, people watch soccer more than football, but I
Of
do
course.
watch football. I'm and I never understood why, after they've been winning the whole game, now they start to close the positions and try not to let the enemy in. But then they they're not maybe the best at this because they haven't been practicing it for the whole game. They've been playing the totally opposite style. I don't know why people do this in chess. I guess it's a bit different. Once you already play a game, right? If we only look at the game without thinking of the whole tournament, if you only look at one game, the style with which you played usually is spread throughout the whole game. You start attacking and you end up sacrificing a piece and giving checkmate to your opponent. It's very rare that a person starts attacking and then switches to a defensive mode, right? Because it doesn't work in chess. All the pieces are already placed to be in an attacking mode. It's very hard to suddenly defend. You would only do that if you were attacking so much the king that you did not protect your own king, and then your opponent is trying to attack you. Maybe your attack was not very successful. You have to come back and return and try to be defensive. But it's a big struggle because you did not put your pieces to be in a defensive mode. It's not that easy to switch style in game. What happened to me, the story that I tell, was because I was looking at a game separately, right? In my other games, I had been playing for winning, more aggressive, I guess, on style. But in my last game, I decided to be more defensive. And that was the wrong strategy. It did not work for me before, and it did not work for me in the last game either, right? But I had incentives to try not to lose the game, right? But I don't think that strategy works very well to be defensive, because it's not the right mentality. You focus so much on not losing that you forget how to win the game, and that doesn't put any pressure on your opponent, right? And so your opponent can just freely try to really attack you. So it's definitely not a strategy I recommend, and I don't know why people use it in these other sports.
I actually, as you were talking, I think they use it in life. I think that
Mm.
people play defense the whole time because they're not willing to take the risk to actually really win. And you're probably more likely to mess up like you described in a defensive mode that you don't practice that. I can't remember, Danielle. I played sports since I don't know, I can't even remember when I didn't play sports. And soccer and lacrosse. And I
Mm.
can't remember ever practicing just holding on to the lead. All I can ever remember practicing is play to win. But
Exactly.
but then we would play to hold the lead.
Mhm.
Hold the ball, and everybody's freaking out because nobody knows how to do that, right? And that's what I think also in life, people aren't willing to take the risk because they
Mhm.
think it's safer to play defense, but 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 that it just never works. I don't know. As you're talking, it just these things maybe I don't know, Daniela. These things I think about just to try to
No,
figure out because
I
it's
agree with you. I mean, and we're only talking about chess and these other sports, but they are a reflection of life. We have so many decisions to take in life, and there's risk involved, and of course, outcomes that we want. We have incentives, but it's all about what you're willing to do to achieve those goals, right? Those outcomes, those things that you want. If you only stick in a defensive mode, then you're more vulnerable than you thought, in a way, because you're not fighting, you're not putting pressure on the others, and you're just closing yourself. And the more you close yourself, the more um, scarce is your vision. It's only focused on one thing, and you start missing all of the other things, right? As if you were on the offense, on the attacking mode, you are looking for opportunities everywhere, right? But if you are closed and just restricted to try to be defensive, then that's when you become more vulnerable. In my way, in my opinion, you miss these opportunities, and it happens to all of us everywhere. And I think we should just be more conscious about it and try to avoid it.
yeah. I think we need to be. I think you have to. I'm not saying you have to play to win, whether in general.
Definitely.
I mean, if you don't play to win, like you just said, I think that's everything comes down to numbers and equations and percentages. And if you don't play to win, you actually miss half the opportunities, and you can't see them because you're not in that mindset. And at that point, the opponent, I think, or it is an opponent, no matter what you're doing, chess or business or another sport, they see more because they are in the attack mode. So they're basically getting an advantage that they can actually just start to cherry pick the holes. And once you see that board, for an analogy here, and how that's working, you now are in control. And every time you make a more aggressive move to put that person on their heels more, their anxiety and pressure actually continues to go up because it's very hard to switch back into that offensive mode. I've never generally, not say generally, I can't remember anything that I've ever watched, played in, or seen where the person says, okay, forget this, prevent defense, we're going back into offense. Like, it just doesn't, it's like their mindset has been very hard to change back.
Absolutely, because you're not thinking about it, right? You are very closely just focusing on one thing, and like you said, you miss all these opportunities, and you don't even realize it that you're missing these opportunities. And I agree with you. It's hard to switch back if you're not even conscious that you are having the problem, all the way until actually losing the game or realizing that suddenly I'm being under attack and there's nothing I can do because you didn't see all of this coming. You were not even paying attention.
Yeah, you know what the really scary part is, Daniela? The really
What?
scary part is if you actually do that in life, you'll be on your deathbed and then it'll be too late if you don't change that that approach at some point, and
Definitely.
then it's the best we know it, right, is going to be too late. And I think maybe all these games sort of teach you that lesson, but some people need to get knocked on top of the head a lot of times, Danielle, to figure that out. Let's go. So then you you're playing professional chess. By the way, can you win any money at this?
Yes, you can. Tournaments usually have a registration fee that you pay to enter the tournament, and then they pool all of that money. Sometimes they get some sponsor to add more money to the pool, and then the winner or the first few places they get the money. Now, chess is not that popular, so there isn't a lot of money on chess. You probably couldn't make a living just playing chess tournaments unless you are at the top of the world, right? Then maybe you can live out of it, but still you don't get paid as well as the top elite players in other sports. Chess is just not that popular, but you can definitely win some money, and you can also give classes and earn an income that way. Some people do it.
How much money can you win in a tournament, just out of curiosity? Is it like $5,000?
No, less than that.
Oh
Um,
God, barely even pay the
yes,
hotel room.
yes. I mean, some very big tournaments may be
Maybe.
able to get that, but usually the tournaments that are organized here in the US are more local tournaments that the prices are not that high. If you go to a national tournament, you may get a bigger price. But usually not that much. But giving a chess class can be profitable. I once gave a class to 3 kids for $90 an hour.
I got
$90.
$180,000 a year. It's pretty good,
It's not bad, right?
right? Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Well, I appreciate you answering that. I'm always curious, like, how people make money and can you make money? But then you get a scholarship to go to college. So, I mean, that's a full ride to go to college to play chess against different colleges. That was here in the United States, wasn't it?
Yes, yes, and that was really the big opportunity in my life, or at least one of the big opportunities, because in my country, in Mexico, my parents didn't have the means to afford a university in the US for me, and that scholarship paid for everything. They paid for my tuition. They gave me an apartment. I stayed at the dorms. They gave me a stipend to pay for my living expenditures. They paid for my books, and I had classes with a grandmaster from Poland, and it was like you said, a full ride. And I really used it to the best of my ability. I ended up double majoring in accounting and finance. and I took as many classes as I could. I would take 7 classes per semester, 21 credits, and I would try to use my time as much as I could, right? Because I couldn't afford it myself, so they were paying for it, and I enjoyed it. I was part of the chess team, and we would go to other tournaments to play. But really, that was the big opportunity that that happened in my life, for me to come from a third world country to the US and really start my career.
I mean, that did pay you, because that's probably worth $200,000 if you add it all up. I mean, tuition, room, board, books. People don't understand how much. I haven't been in school in
It's
a
so
long time,
expensive.
but yeah, I mean, the last formal, I did some studying after UNC, but I think that my MBA cost $125,000 or something
Oh
like that.
wow, it's so expensive. Yes.
Yeah, those are the kids you're teaching. That's how much they're paying when you're when you're there. I mean, it's super expensive, but the books alone would be a few that. I could be exaggerating. It seemed like a lot of money. So, chess for you really did pay off. And then, did you get burned out? Did you, after college, did you say I've had enough and just say, like,
So I think it was a combination of two things. First is that once I started studying, I discovered that I really liked studying. I liked accounting and finance. I double majored, but I think I liked accounting more. And I enjoyed taking classes and learning this new method of the double entry bookkeeping system. I just was fascinated, and I wanted to spend my time studying, and I was very devoted to getting the best GPA that I could, because I wanted to get more opportunities afterwards. Again, my parents couldn't afford anything. I was basically supporting myself from that moment on. I mean, through the scholarship. But then after that, I was going to have to do something else, right? And I wanted to stay in this country. So I wanted to either go to grad school or maybe get a job. And I had to get sponsors because I was an international student. So that was very hard to get. So I wanted to really be the best student that I could, for me to have a higher possibility to get more opportunities later. So I ended up actually graduating with a 4.0 GPA, perfect GPA, because maybe that ego that I had from chess, I really wanted to do that. And that meant that I had a bit less time to spend on chess. Granted, it was also weird for me, because now that I was at school under a scholarship, chess became more of a responsibility. I had to go to the classes, I had to play tournaments, I had to study, I had to sometimes give some classes for some events that they had. So it was more like a task that I had that was preventing me from studying accounting and from pursuing my career professionally. But I think I just lost a bit of interest too, because I was discovering this other world. So the combination of those two things led me to say I need to stop playing chess professionally. I still play as a hobby, but not professionally anymore. And then after college, I actually ended up entering into a PhD program at Rice University in accounting. So that definitely meant that I did not have time to play chess anymore, because a PhD program is very intense as well. But I was fine with it. I had made my peace already and saw chess as a hobby instead of a profession, right? I had switched my profession to the real world profession, and my career focused profession, if that makes any sense to you.
yeah, of course. Did you went into a PhD program right after your 4-year degree?
Yes, I did my bachelor's in 4 years, and then immediately afterwards, I jumped into the PhD program.
So the PhD program included a master's degree?
No, it did not, and it did not require me to have a master's degree either.
Huh.
Um, but it's very interesting. Usually, when you do a PhD, you usually need a master's. But in accounting, it's a bit different because the master's in accounting teaches you how to be an accountant in the real world, right? How to really think as part of a corporation and apply these rules for the company. But an accounting PhD is the opposite. You do not think like a company, you think like a researcher. You study data, you find patterns, you study what happens behind the rules, how these rules came into existence in the first place. So you don't need to have experience in the accounting world as a full-time job. It's helpful because it may help you to see the world a bit different and understand things a bit better, but it's not required. What you need as a PhD student, I guess a good candidate, is being exposed to a good math background, because you're going to need math and statistics and maybe some computer software skills. But more than that, you need to try to understand academia and how research works, and especially in this business world there's so much overlap between economics, finance, accounting. So all of these really economic concepts is what drives accounting research. So I did not have a master's. I did not have any full-time experience. And also my school where I went to do my bachelor's, they didn't have math requirement for the accounting and finance degrees that I had. So I had not taken any calculus or linear algebra, and that was really necessary for the PhD program. So before going into the PhD program, that I had to study on my own, take that summer and just study on my own, all with a bunch of books to try to be at the same level than the other candidates that had been accepted. But I think that was the other big opportunity that I had in my life, because I wasn't coming from a very big university. It was the University of Texas at Brownsville. That's where I went for college, which doesn't exist anymore. It merged with another one. It's a small teaching institution. It doesn't have a PhD program in accounting, right? It doesn't do research, basically. So I was very lucky that Rice, being a big research school, accepted me into their program. Again, because I didn't have master's background, I didn't have full-time experience. I was not coming from one big name university research school. So my letters of recommendation were good, were great, but they were not from leading researchers as opposed to other candidates applying for the program. And I didn't have the big math background that was required. So I guess what they saw in me was that, hey, this person, she seems really devoted. She proved it by trying to get this perfect GPA. At least she's trying to signal that she really wants to be a devoted student and wants to learn and do her best. But she also has this chess background that is very interesting. And again, that has helped me so much in my life, having that background. People found it interesting and thought that that was another proof that I was intellectually focused and that I wanted to, think of different patterns. So I think they gave me a shot because of all of these things, but it was risky for them. And I'm glad they gave me the shot because it ended up working. I did well in the program. I got an amazing job. And for me, it was, again, another fully funded way to study more. So for all my education, I have a PhD. I haven't paid a penny just to get a PhD all the way in the US, but I've been very lucky.
That's crazy. Are you a US citizen?
No, I'm not. I'm on a work visa. Up until last year, I had been on a student visa for over 10 years. But I've moved to a work visa. I'm on a work visa. And hopefully through my husband, we are in the process of getting a green card, because through his job, it was going to be faster. But through my job, eventually the idea is that I would get a green card too.
Do you think you'll become a US citizen?
I don't know. We'll see. Probably, maybe. I'm hesitant because I know in my bones that I'm from Mexico, right? I don't want to lose my identity, But at the same time, I've been living in this country for 12 years, and I call it my home. And I mean, it gave me my education and so many wonderful opportunities that I feel like I belong here. For many years in the beginning, I didn't feel like I belonged in this country. You know, I was always an international student, and I was always trying to fight for these opportunities, even to get internships. I struggled so much because people didn't want to give internships to international students. They wanted to give them to American students because for international students, they had to sponsor them, right? It's a whole legal
It's a
process.
process, yeah.
Yes. So I always felt excluded. Also, when filing my taxes, I've always done my own taxes. I had to file as an alien, right? I'm what's called an alien, at least for the first years that I'm on a student visa. So I've never really felt like I belonged. But after some time, I really do feel like I belong now. I feel this is my home, and maybe citizenship, if I have the opportunity, would be something that I would really consider.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, you were a guest in the beginning. That'd be no different than me going to Mexico. They would consider me
Exactly.
a guest, right? And it would be the same thing. I don't think employers do that on purpose. I think as an employer, I understand it. It's an investment in the person that you may not get back because
Yes.
that whole system is not as straightforward as one might think. I mean, the path to citizenship or that sponsorship with that certain work visa, there's only so many of them, and
Exactly.
it's as much of a lottery as it is anything. So you're making that bet. So that sort of makes sense. But you made it through, and now you're working at UNC Chapel Hill, uh, Keenan Flagler Business School as a professor in accounting, and you're studying your research on disclosure strategy. Is that I read some of I didn't read all your papers,
Yeah.
obviously, but because I didn't have time, but I find it interesting and it seems to tie to your chess strategy um, background. And I had mentioned to you, I always have read 10K statements mainly because
Mm.
10Ks basically tell you everything about a company, a public company. I mean, they disclose everything. They in theory, in theory, need to disclose to the investors required by law how they do things, how many factories they have, or how they're manufacturing. And for the most part, I think disclose the financials, and you can really understand ownership, incentives. You can understand their contracts that they write. But then in the beginning of those 10Ks, and I think they're at the beginning of everything, quarterly filings and updated filings, there's all these disclosures, which if you actually read those disclosures, which I have read before, I don't read anymore because it's like they're just, or I don't think they're disclosures, but I guess they're disclosures. You can
Mm.
comment on that, but they're basically saying, hey, none of this is like, we don't know this. This is a prediction. The market could die. Like you basically I mean, if you really read that, you might not even invest. But um, how did you get interested in that? Did I summarize really where your research is around?
Yes, 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 definitely. So, you mentioned disclosures, right? I just want to make the clarification that companies, like you said, they are mandated to report some information, right? I mean, they have to publicly traded companies register with the SEC. There are these mandates they have to follow to communicate information with investors, right? And some of that information is encapsulated on the financial statements. We call that reporting, where they have to report the performance, end of the year, goals that they achieved, what is their financial status, right? Those are the financial statements. But like you said, there are many other disclosures that companies also issue to the public, right? This is the additional information where companies talk about this performance, they discuss it, they talk about the future, some of the risks that they are facing. They talk about their products, and all of these disclosures, many of them are, like you said, encapsulated on the 10K. So 10Ks, annual reports, are very informative because they not only contain the financial statements, but all of these other disclosures. And the interesting thing is that there is a lot of discretion on in regards to what is being communicated in these disclosures, right? Managers and companies, they decide what they're going to talk about and how they're going to say it. So in my research, I try to study these decisions, the determinants of how firms choose to say things in one way versus another. For instance, they may be very specific, that they may name their competitors and say which products they're developing and talking about where they see those products in the future. But maybe they are more quiet on that end and try to imply their achievements and their good performance in other ways, right? Maybe they don't want to specifically reveal the names of the big customers, the competitors. So these decisions, right, how vague disclosures are, how specific, or also maybe they say something in an obfuscated way, right? Because they may want to talk about their performance, but what if their performance that year was not very good? They may want to still describe what happened over the year, but maybe not blatantly say, we did terribly this year, right? So they may choose some other words that perhaps portray a better picture of the company, or maybe that discuss the future plans to make to fix things, right? So all of these are decisions, and they affect how investors view these companies, right? Like you said, if I read these terrible disclosures, maybe I wouldn't even want to invest in this company, right? But companies know that. So perhaps they will not say these terrible disclosures. Perhaps they will say it in a different way to show you what they can do, right? So this is one example of my research, that I try to see what companies disclose, how they do it, and how that affects the markets. And 10Ks is one of the big places where they talk about it, but there's also other channels, like for instance, conference calls at the end of every quarter, where they disclose these other plans. Let me just bring it back.
It could just be the connection.
Oh, okay.
Possibly. I see that you're not uploaded.
Oh, okay.
There you are.
Okay.
Now we got a different view.
I'm
We have
in another camera. Okay.
we got another camera. Look at you. You're very professional. You have all these different
Have
camera
just as a
angles.
backup. I look at here. I had a backup camera in case things went south.
You're amazing.
But anyways, just as I was saying, conference calls is another big channel where companies discuss these results. So all of these different decisions and disclosure channels have a lot of information that can be useful to investors and analysts and other parties. And I'm trying to, in my research, I try to find these patterns, to find this hidden information, if you may.
So have you found that? Can you predict stock prices and stock market reactions with a high correlation coefficient by certain disclosures that they put in there?
Well, that is really tricky, and there are many companies trying to do that too. And I think if I had managed to do that, probably I wouldn't be here. I would be on a beach in
Well, I know.
Thailand.
That's what I'm trying to get at, Danielle.
Uh,
I think it'd be possible though in your research, because if we took all those research papers and continued research and we built the model and fed the data, then in theory, I mean, there's no cause and effect, but there probably would be somewhere with one of them at least, right?
mhm.
A high correlation coefficient to predict future performance based on these certain phrases, nuance, whatever it may be. Have you looked at doing that?
No, definitely. I mean, and there are some people who have found some trading strategies based on research. An example was an old paper on accruals in accounting. Whenever you don't record something immediately because there is this difference in time of when you actually receive the cash, right? You may record something that is called an accrual. And people found that companies have different levels of accruals, and a strategy based on that. It would take some time to explain it, but some people found a strategy based on something based on accounting and based on the information that was disclosed, and they turned out making money out of it. Eventually, once the market understood that strategy, then the money was gone, right? Because they had already found the strategy. But I haven't done it in my research. My research is more to try to understand how firms make these disclosures and why, and what effect that has on investors. But I do have looked at interesting outcomes. For instance, in one paper that I just published in the Journal of Accounting Research, we were actually looking at race, at diversity, and that was one implication, big implication from disclosures that companies had in their conference call. So we found that after the murder of George Floyd in May 25, 2020, diversity became a big issue that companies felt that pressure to, not only talk about it in their conference calls, because we observe a spike in the discussion of conference calls talking about diversity, but also do something about it, right? Hire more African American directors, have more DEI departments, have more initiatives. So this is an example of a disclosure that we observed. We found patterns in this disclosure that ends up having a very big impact on not just the company, but also outsiders, and that investors are interested in these discussions and what actions companies take.
Well, I think I've signaled my opening, which is a very aggressive make money opening. So you can see where I stay focused a lot of the time. But that's very interesting, and I'm sure you've seen that. I want to be respectful of your time because I know you have a teaching job, and I'm sure you have a lot of papers to grade and things like that, and lessons to make, and research to do. But I'm really grateful for you writing back and sharing your story today. I think you have an amazing story, and I think there's so many lessons for listeners to get from it. One of the things that I really am I respect that you've done is that you've got these scholarships and you really honored those scholarships by doing the best you could. And I think too often, sometimes people get those things and then believe they're entitled to them, and then they sometimes don't achieve that 4.0. So it's very clear that you optimized that and probably aged yourself a little bit from taking all those classes. I've never heard of taking 7 classes a semester. I can't even imagine that. But and playing chess. So that is an amazing feat. With all of that, from your lesson from getting a scholarship to being a professional chess player to now teaching students in the academic setting and doing research, if you were to give people 3 pieces of advice, what 3 pieces of advice would you give them?
Okay. So the first one has to be chess related. So the first one is, if you don't know how to play chess or never heard of it, try it for one time, see what it feels like. It really has a lot of great benefits for you. But especially if you have kids, I recommend you to teach your kids chess. Chess has a lot of advantages for kids, especially because it teaches them to be patient, to think, to concentrate, to plan in advance, right? To be creative and to imagine and be strategic. So definitely is something that your kids could not only enjoy, but learn a lot from. So that's my first advice. My second advice, and something that I like to do, is if you are one day bored on your phone trying to find some entertainment, watch some debate on some controversial topic and hear both positions. I love to do that because sometimes I discover that I was wrong on one thing, or I changed my mind. I hear the opposite sides, and it makes me think better once I'm defining where I stand. And sometimes I don't even know where I stand before I watch the argument, right? I have some priors, but maybe I don't have the full information. So always thinking about the other perspectives, arguments is going to make your points even better. Or who knows, maybe you update your beliefs, right? So especially on controversial issues, because nowadays the world is, it's full of controversial issues, and you have to be aware of them and have a position and at least an opinion about it. So that's a good thing to do. And the last one is always try to learn something new. So now I'm reading a book on how the universe was created from nothing. It's from this scientist Lawrence Krauss, A Universe from Nothing. Why there is something rather than nothing. And I'm not a physicist. I don't understand everything in the book. Sometimes I have to Google things to try to make sense of them. But it makes me think about, the universe and time and general relativity. And I just find it fascinating to always get out of your comfort zone, your career, your expertise, and just learn something new about the world that is interesting. And it's just going to keep you mentally active all the time and learning and curious about the world.
Well, those are 3 great pieces of advice, Daniela. Thanks for sharing those. Where can listeners find you? Where's the best place to find you and your research and all the things that you're doing?
Yes, so you can go to my website. My website is danidelaparra.com. So Dani is my short name, Dani, and then my last name, delaparra.com. And you can see my CV with my email address. If you want to send me an email, I'll be more than happy to be in contact with you.
That's awesome. We'll put all that in the show notes. Daniela, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share your story with us and talk a little bit about chess.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun, and thank you very much. I'm very happy to have been in this episode.
Bye, everyone.